So I'm delighted to have here in the Design Notes studio the designer and publisher of Roleplayer Adventures, Goblin Vaults, Cape May and countless others, Keith Matjeka, though he didn't design all of those. Keith Matjeka, thank you for coming to the Design Notes studio.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Ben.
So, in life, we rarely get to blow our own trumpet, as it were. So my first question here is to allow you to do that. Don't feel constrained by modesty. So when did you know you were good at what you do?
It's such a tough question off the bat, but I mean, I think anyone that does anything, it's always a struggle to, like, when someone says that you're good at what you do, like, it's hard to believe them sometimes, but I guess when a role player came out and it really resonated with people, and it was like, just the reviews were really hot, and I was like, well, maybe I'm not so bad at this thing, and it really encouraged me to keep working in games and keep wanting to do more stuff in games. So that was kind of the first bit, but there's always doubt in what you do. There's this idea of imposter syndrome, and maybe this is all a fluke, and maybe I just got lucky. But I think over time I've kind of realized that, like, hey, this is a thing that I can do, that I have this ability that maybe other people don't, and people get a lot of joy out of the things that I do. So that's pretty cool. So.
But you had Role Player, and you decided on the basis of Role Player to start a company, do a Kickstarter, hire an artist, all of those sorts of things. You must have had an inkling, right, that there was something there.
Yeah, I mean, there's that initial spark of, like, some of it is my purpose, my desire to do these things is just out of not being 100% happy with other things that people are doing in that area. Like, I enjoy this hobby, and I'm playing games that I feel like could be better. So I've got these ideas. Maybe there's some arrogance or gumption. It's like, I could probably do this as well. Maybe even a little bit better. So let's give it a shot. So that's true, and it's just, I design primarily for myself, right? So I design games that I am really excited about, and it's like, well, might as well share them with the world. Maybe other people like them too. So that's really the goal for me, is just to make games that I'm excited to play. They just happen to be coming out of my brain instead of somebody else's.
I've spoken to a lot of designers, and they say by the time the game is out the door, it's in the box, they never want to look at it again because they've play tested it 100 times. I mean, do you still get your games down off the shelf and play them?
So it's definitely, like, when you work on a project, work on a game, and it's such a long process, and once it's kind of in a box and in your hands, like, I'm already on to the next 2, 3, 4, 5 games, and so that's like ancient history to me, and I'm always focused on the next thing. So I do have those moments where I'm at a show, and I'm demoing something, or somebody wants to play one of my designs, and I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll teach you. That's cool. And I sit there in the middle of the game, and I say, this game is really good. I like kind of surprisingly enjoy my own design, and then I realize, well, of course I'm enjoying this because I designed it to my taste. So of course, but there's kind of that moment of going back and kind of being in that mindset again of, like, when it was originally being designed, and kind of putting it together, and really kind of it's kind of an opportunity to kind of go back to that moment. But the most fun is when you play your own games and you just see the joy that other people are having, or, like, they see like they have this moment of feeling clever. Or so one of the goals that I have when I play games, or things that I like to see, is, like, when people I try to create this feeling of cleverness, or feeling of being powerful, like, and when I feel that way, and I see other people kind of feeling that when they play my games, it's it's super fun and delightful. So
let's go back sort of into your history then. So before you were an analog game producer. You're also a digital game
Yeah.
producer. So what was the journey that got you to where you are now?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always loved games, but in my professional life, yeah, I worked in music for a long time, not for a long time, for a while, and then I worked in video games for 15 years. Half of them on the publishing side, and the second half on the development side. So, kind of games have been my life for a long time, and then I started getting back into analog games just as a social option of getting together, meeting new people, having kind of social interactions with people. I had moved to a new town. I was kind of looking to build some friendships, and as adults, it's kind of harder to build friendships, I think, and doing that around games is one way to do that. And then I became enamored with it, right? So I think it's really common, and I would guess that when people get introduced to games, like they get hooked. Like, oh my gosh, this is a really interesting experience. And then you open Board Game Geek, or you go to a game store, and it's like there's a brand new world that you didn't even know about. And it's really exciting, and I want to play everything, and there's all these experiences that they're just waiting for you. And so I played a lot of games, and I live in a town that has a lot of gamers, and there's gaming like almost every night of the week somewhere in town. And at some point, you have that moment where like you've played a lot of games, and at the time, Kickstarter was kind of new, and there were people having big projects. There was people like Jamie Stegmaier and James Matthew at the time were kind of really blogging about the steps you need to take to bring a board game to market through Kickstarter. Kind of laying the groundwork and the blueprints for you. And in my ignorance, I was like, that doesn't seem so hard. I should try that. So then I just started designing some of my own things in my free time. So I was working in video games, and then I was doing analog games on the side in the evenings and on my lunch breaks and stuff. And um, decided to give Kickstarter a shot, and that went relatively well. So and just kind of kept building that. It's like, okay, I'm definitely one of those people where it's like once I finish something, then it's like, okay, what's next? And it's like the first game I did on Kickstarter was a game called Bullfrogs, which is a small card and bits kind of thing. And it was like, okay, this is done. I've accomplished this. Like, how do I level up? What's the next thing? And then eventually, Role Player came, and then the expansion Kickstarter had done quite well. And I was like, well, maybe I should be doing this like all the time. So at that point, I started planning to kind of move away from my day job in video games and do Thunderworks full time. So that was kind of the journey from kind of where I started and where I ended. And obviously, there's from now on, like currently, Thunderworks now is 3 people instead of 1 person. So we're still a small company, but we're doing. The goal is to do like 3 games a year and really focus on putting really quality stuff out, and I think it shows, and that's kind of where we're at.
And so, I wouldn't be crude enough to talk about figures, but I've always assumed working in the video game industry doesn't pay badly. And so how nerve-wracking was it to leave a reasonably well-paid job to something that is kind of dependent on the next Kickstarter?
I mean, there's definitely a risk, right? And I put a lot of thought into it. When I was at the time, I was working at a company called Raven Software, and we were working on Call of Duty games. So I mean, those are big titles which have big teams, and that those teams do well in terms of how much they're paid. So for me, it's just about kind of living within my means, and I did quite a bit of planning. It's like I knew I wanted to leave. So I did things like I worked really hard to minimize my bills so that when the biggest consideration being in the US is health insurance is a big deal because from my employer paying for it to now me paying for it is a big deal. So I paid down a bunch of bills, and I made it so that when I transitioned, I could live under the same budget, which it made it easy for me to kind of financially figure out if I could do this by kind of replacing some of my previous bills with my health insurance and that stuff. And I had a lot of I had support from my wife at the time. She had her own job as well. Now she works for me at Thunderworks, um, but it was a big decision. I'd never kind of made a leap of faith like that in my life. So I asked a lot of friends and family members for advice. Reached out to other game creators who had done the same. I reached out to Patrick Leader at Leader Games when he had left and went full time. Maybe the year before, and other friends, and everybody's like, you just got to do it. There's you're gonna if you don't, you're gonna be wondering your whole life, like, if you had made that transition, how would things have been different? So, you just cross your fingers and go for it, and it's been working out so far.
And to what degree do you think not having to pay East or West Coast prices for sort of housing and all of that sort of stuff contributed?
Yeah. Oh, it's a big deal. So, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, which has a pretty moderate cost of living compared. Previously I actually lived in San Francisco Bay Area, where the cost of living is crazy. So part of that, if I was living in the San Francisco area like I was previously, I wouldn't have been able to do it for sure. Um, so and Thunderworks, I for a long, long time, I didn't pay myself anything, when it was more of a side gig. So, when I went full time, I basically had to start paying myself, for tax reasons and stuff. So, I had saved up a nest egg, and I at the time I had a handful of products that were, I had a couple Evergreens. Cartographers was out then, and Role Player were both out, and those continued to sell well. So I could kind of, to some degree, count on some income coming from those titles, and definitely, being where I live made things easier for sure.
And so, as a publisher now, and especially sort of post COVID, what do you think the state of the analog game industry is right now?
So during the pandemic, I think in general board games did well, right? I mean, a lot of people were stuck at home. People were looking for things to do. Board games and like jigsaw puzzles, stuff like that, were selling really well. And then I think kind of coming out of that, it's been people have been pulling back a little bit, um, and kind of, at least in the U.S., the inflation that's been going on in the last year or so has affected, people's spending habits for sure. Their groceries and their gas is more expensive than it was, and so I do think currently we're in a situation where things are pulling back a little bit. There's certain game types fluctuate in terms of popularity. Miniature games are more popular right now. Role playing games have been really popular for the last couple of years. Obviously, Thunderworks is focused mainly on board games, and board games is still healthy, but it's probably not enjoying as much, like, great sales as we had in the last few years. Um, but I mean, that's just kind of the way things go. Our focus is to continue making great games, and people seem to enjoy them, and board games, these things fluctuate. So maybe in the future board games will be kind of at the top of the heap in terms of other genres. But I think some of that you're seeing, there's a lot of kind of crossovers that are happening. There's more board games that are feeling like RPGs, or RPGs that are adding kind of cards and token elements that are kind of board game things. Obviously, board games have more miniatures in them than probably ever before. So there's definitely like a melding of these different groups of game types.
And so, we as we record, we're just coming out of something of a scandal has just rippled through the board game world regarding the relationship between publishers and content creators, especially with regards to Kickstarter. When you go through a process of kickstarting a game, I mean, to what degree do you pay for content? To what degree do you liaise with content creators and all of that sort of stuff?
Right. So I mean, there's you build relationships with content creators, uh, because you're working with them, and um, we do usually do a fair number, like maybe two or three paid content. That's usually because those are the the creators that have more subscribers and kind of have a more guaranteed view count, and maybe they have higher production values. And then we also try to find other content creators that are either just getting out of the gate or don't have as much experience, to try to get our games in as many places as possible. And that's like a different process. Like getting a preview or a how to play is something that's opinion, doesn't have an opinion included. It's just like, this is the game, this is how it works. This is these are what it looks like and how it plays. And then there's a clear delineation between something like that and then something that, like, here's a review where I just a reviewer will ask for it, and we may send them a copy, and they're gonna say positive or negative things. They're gonna voice their opinion, which is what their job is in that particular scenario. Um, there's this idea of like paying for a good review. Like, that's not something that we have any real experience with, and that doesn't seem like something that should be happening. Um, or in terms of like, here's a negative review, pay us to replace it with more positive stuff. That just seems crazy to talk to me. So um, there's definitely the relationship between a content creator and a publisher can be complicated. Obviously, the publisher wants their game seen in a very positive light, because high quality positive content can lead to lots of sales and awareness of your title, which is something every publisher wants. But there's that's not a guaranteed thing. So there's things that I think is that you can do, that is kind of okay, that's understandable. So there's things that we do where we say we've got a trick taking game, and content creator, we watch lots of content, and we can kind of get a feel for the kind of games that this content creator likes versus that one doesn't. So if this content creator loves trick taking games, like, we're going to try to send them a copy. If we know that this content creator doesn't like trick taking games, like, we know that game's not for them, so why waste their time and our time trying to see if they want to make content for us on that game? So that's really the only thought process that we have, is that we try to match up content creators with our games that we think they're more likely to enjoy. And But there's no like manipulation involved in terms of like, hey, here's a great game, we're gonna throw you this money and for the video, and you're gonna like it, right? Wink, wink. Like, that kind of stuff doesn't happen, at least from the Thunderworks side.
So back to sort of, you're a designer as well as a publisher, and you've worked both in the digital sphere and the analog sphere. And, people who are either clever or like to pretend to be talk about the sort of interrelation between analog games and digital games, sort of in terms of mechanics and things like that. How similar are the two forms?
I mean, obviously they're both games. They're built for entertainment, interesting decisions. Obviously, there's a lot of similarities and differences. Some of the important differences, when I play an analog game, um, the biggest barrier to entry for players, and the biggest headache for a lot of people who are interested in board games, especially if they don't play a lot of them, is the rule book and learning how to play. Right. That once someone knows how to play, you're much then you're like, I know how to play this. Let's play it again. It kind of removes that barrier to entry. And in video games, there are no rule books. There are tutorials, right? So the game teaches you how to play. That's something that is rare in board games, and there are some board games that have those types of things. But you find that players oftentimes they want to get to the full game. They want to know everything at the same time, so they don't even actually want to play the tutorial. They don't want to learn bits at a time. They want it all at once. So that's something that I wish tutorial, like, it was a way to get players up to speed to playing the game faster without the rule book. And obviously, how to play videos and that stuff is helpful, but it definitely isn't the same as cracking open the latest Zelda game and learning a couple buttons and away we go. there's kind of a language um, built into video games, like how you know buttons are usually configured and usually what buttons tend to do, like where the jump button usually is, and that's not as true. There's some of that in board games, but it's not always as much. Most people know how to draw a card. They know how to roll a die. Those are kind of built into the language of playing board games. But I think that's more so in video games and maybe over time there'll be standardizations. But every game, I think every game's different. The mechanics are different. How things interact tend to be different in board games more than in video games. So, um, other in terms of like, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the process of making games. In terms of coming up with an idea, prototyping, right? A digital prototype versus an analog prototype are different, but the whole concept is very very similar. Working with artists, building things visual, having a great UI in a video game versus having great graphic design in a board game that has useful icons. There's a lot of similarities there, and this. And for me, moving from digital to analog, I was able to use a lot of the same skills that I learned making video games, making board games. Um, but there's there's one of the other huge differences, from one of the hardest things as a publisher is, one, manufacturing times, which are long, and moving these boxes around the world, which is time intensive and costly, and then also managing inventory to make sure you've got the right amount in existence to meet demand, versus working on a video game. It's like I upload the game to the Steam server, and then your unlimited number of people can buy it for an unlimited amount of time. All these kind of logistics and issues like just don't exist, and those are the types of things that can really, the logistics of manufacturing and moving pieces around, can sink or soar a publisher. So that's a whole realm that I'm very jealous of. Digital video games don't have to deal with.
And also, it seems to me that from sort of I am sort of vaguely connected to the board game industry, and it seems to me that there's still, even now, even with a company like Asmodee being on the scene, it feels still like a sort of craft industry. I mean, what is the difference in terms of kind of professionalism, in terms of, money, and in terms of, I assume with Role Player, you design the game on your own, you playtest on your own, you develop on your own, and, not many, especially big video games, get created by one sole person, right? I mean, what are those kind of differences like between the two industries?
Yeah, that's a huge difference. I worked on many AAA big budget video games, and at the end of the day, it's hard to like point at the screen and say I made that, right? Like, I was part of the process. I managed the people that did some of the things that were related to this, but it's not like, hey, that's mine. That doesn't really happen in video games much. Um, in board games, the amount of work that one person does to the creation of the thing is huge, right? So when I look at Role Player, like, I did the art direction on every single one of these cards. I decided what the name of the game was. I built the mechanics, and I managed the development. I decided, what the back of the box was going to look like. Like, every decision, not every, but most of the decisions were all mine. So then I have a much greater sense of ownership and pride of that thing coming out than something that I was on a team of 500 people working on. But the audience that Role Player reaches, unfortunately, is not the same number of people that are going to play the latest Call of Duty game. So it is a craft, kind of more of a boutique market. Obviously, I would love to have more and more gamers playing my titles, but that's just the way it is. But there's a much bigger sense of ownership of the games, and that's, as a creator, that's a great feeling. On the other hand, like, I like working with a team. And if something doesn't go well, if there's if you make a bad decision, there's like nobody else to point their finger at. Like if somebody complains about the way something works in the game, or an image on a card, or the price of the product, or anything like that, it kind of all falls on my shoulders. So um, there's some pros and cons to that for sure. Um, but that's it's one of the things that I like about kind of moving away from video games, and moving into analog games. Is just like um, I'm just more proud of the work that I've done, um, and I think that's cool.
And so why do we have such a difference? So I watch videos on YouTube about sort of the early days of video gaming in the 80s. And when you look at
Yeah.
the numbers that Super Mario Brothers shifted in the 80s, it's in the tens of millions, right? And even something like Catan hasn't come close. Why do you think it is that there is such a discrepancy? Because as far as I can see, it can't even be sort of simplicity or anything, because AAA games are mechanically very advanced, very hardcore, and sell a lot of copies. Why do you think that the analog industry, and I assume, will never hit those heights that the digital one does?
Yeah, I think some of it is cultural. I think board gaming is kind of viewed, at least in the U.S., as kind of a thing that kids do. Um, and obviously there are kids games, but the idea of adults playing board games is, for whatever reason, is not as culturally a thing. I do think the as human beings, we are visual creatures, and the things that people can do in video games in terms of like visual fidelity and animations, and like nearly lifelike in some examples. um, I think as humans we love that. That's what we're attracted to. um, you know, don't get me wrong, Catan is a beautiful game, but a wooden house that's green is not as appealing as a 10,000 polygon character in the latest video game. Um, so I think that's a part of it. There's there's also more. In a board game, you have to be more involved in the process. That you're taking on more responsibility, and there's kind of this social agreement that you make with other players in terms of like, here's an environment we're going to play in, and these are the rules, and it's very structured, and there's winning and losing, and there's something attractive about that from a player. But um, there's more of an investment in the player than there is in the world of video games. I think there's the barrier of getting together with other humans. Popping on a video game and playing for a half hour at 4 in the morning because you can't sleep or whatever is a thing you can do. That's hard to do with a board game. So um, there's it just is harder. But we can definitely argue more rewarding, especially people who play games will feel that way.
So, can you tell us then what we can expect from Thunderworks in the future?
Yeah, so more great games. So the stuff coming next from Thunderworks, we've got two titles that we kickstarted last year that are getting close to deliveries. There's a title called Dawn of Ulos, which is a economic fantasy game that backers will be the Kickstarter backers will be getting in the next month. We're about to start fulfillment on it, and then it'll be our big Gen Con release in August. And after that will be the delivery of Golpex's Secret, which is the second expansion for Role Player Adventures, which also comes with a new printing of the base game and the first expansion. So that game in particular, that was my kind of not magnum opus, but it was like something that I was very invested in, and I spent quite a few years working on. And it was difficult to get a hold of due to kind of low print run numbers on the first print run. So I'm excited about that coming out in October ish. and being more widely available, especially to folks outside of the U.S. And but we have got two Kickstarter campaigns coming. One is in July 11th, called Stone Spine Architects. It's from the designer of Cartographers, Jordi Adon, and it is a drafting kind of sushi go style game in which you're building a dungeon in front of you and doing you're collecting gold and adding elements to your dungeon, and then also um, kind of selecting different goals that you get. Kind of, if you kind of think about cartographers in terms of shapes and paths and connections and stuff, you're going to end up picking up different goals along the way. So, you might need a column of goblins, and each one of those is worth 2 points, kind of thing. And that one plays 1 to 5 players. It's about 45 minutes long. It's lighter. It's kind of in the same complexity as cartographers, so it's not. I wouldn't say it's a heavy game by any means, but it's definitely a good time. And then, so that's July 11th. And then in the fall, probably in October, we're going to do a Kickstarter for a title called Metro Runner, which is a cyberpunk theme Euro game. It takes about 90 minutes, plays 1 to 5, where you are, there's a cool hacking mini game in the center of the board where you get to flip and turn tiles to meet patterns. And you're zooming around Mirror City, picking up jobs and from different corporations and kind of executing those as well. There's a little bit of engine building and some kind of, there's a few tracks you're going to keep an eye on. But that's from a local designer here out of Madison that I've worked with a long time, and we've been doing development on that game for quite a couple of years, and it's really polished and singing, and we're excited to see that.
Excellent. So 2 more questions then. So you're at a convention and you go out in the evening, and you're coming back from the loo and you walk past a table and there's a group of gamers and you hear Thunderworks mentioned. So you sidle into the corner and you eavesdrop on their conversation. What do you hope they're saying about you?
That they make great games, right? To me, at the end of the day, it's all about the games. I do think people don't care about the company as much as they care about the games, and I think they probably care about the designer even less. I think I kind of have this viewpoint that, like, once the game is released, like it's not my baby anymore. It's like it's the world's, and it's for them to enjoy, and I've kind of moved on to the next thing, and I'm proud of that thing, and I'm glad it exists. But I've had that experience where I walk by it and I go into a random place and I see people playing a game I designed. And it's a cool feeling. So sometimes it turns into a weird awkward moment where I was like, "Hey, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I designed this game," and they're like, "Who are you? Get out of here!" But it is super fun to have that moment, and I I'm just focused on play and making things that people enjoy, and I like to kind of keep it that way.
So, last question then. Why is gaming good?
Why is gaming is good? Because it creates a opportunity for human beings to interact and play and enjoy themselves and have a shared experience. You know, it's also good because it can transport you to another place sometimes. Similar to like a good book where you can get immersed into a world or a setting. But to me, the primary good of games is just creating connections between human beings. I mean, it's a little cliche, but as we live in more connected digital worlds, it feels less and less like we're having real interpersonal in person connections, and board games create that, and that's a great feeling.
So if people want to know what's happening with Thunderworks and all of that good stuff, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, www.thunderworksgames.com is a great resource, and then you can always follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and that, like, in general, we're easy to get a hold of. We send out a monthly newsletter for people who are interested in what we're doing. and you can sign up for that at the thunderworksgames.com website. Um, and we just pop in there all over the place. So um, we like to be on podcasts and being at different events as well. So, and also we'll be at this year we will be at Origins in Ohio and Gen Con and PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia at the end of the year with a few smaller conventions. There's a small one here in Madison called Gamehole Con that I go to, and um, this year we're not doing anything overseas, but we're hoping to get over to Essen in 2024, and we'll see about UK Games Expo as well. So I think kind of coming out of COVID, the idea of like kind of becoming a big world traveler again, a little bit slow out of the gate on that, but it'll come back for sure.
Brilliant. Well, Keith Matjeka, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.